Now, as we've been reporting, South Africa remains on lockdown level 3 following President Cyril Ramaphosa's address to the nation last night. 20 land ports of entry will now be closed during level 3, and this until the 15th of February. And 20 million doses of the vaccine have been secured, and most of which will arrive within the first half of the year. The Command Council is still assessing the safety of schools for reopening, and to help us wade through many of these issues, we are joined now by political analyst Ongama Mtimka, who joins us now to discuss this further. Thank you so much and welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina, from the friendly city, and good morning to your viewers.
So, firstly, let me ask you, what to your mind stood out from the President's address to the nation last night, and what would he have hoped to address and convey to the nation, and do you think he was successful in doing so?
I think what was very important, Sakina, was to first, kind of deal with the panic that was coming from society about a possible lockdown level 5 as a result of the numbers that had spiked in recent weeks, notwithstanding the fact that we were already on stricter lockdown, on a relatively stricter lockdown level after a long time of being on level 1. So while the meeting itself followed a recent meeting of the National Coronavirus Command Council, it was important for the President to address the nation, given the speculation about level 5. But also, I think he needed to reassure South Africans on many questions pertaining to how government manages the pandemic going forward, questions about medication and vaccination, and South Africa's plans. You'd recall that in recent weeks, government had changed from an initial plan to target 10% of the population later in the year to saying we are targeting almost everybody by the time the year ends. And also there were missed payments as far as vaccine preparations are concerned. And then there were reports that the payment was made and there was some procurement of the vaccine. So there needed to be a lot of clarification of issues pertaining to how the state is managing the vaccine, but also the role of society and what's going to be continued to be expected from the rest of us needed to be clarified to deal with the emerging panic about a possible lockdown level 5.
Ongama, do you foresee government struggling to convince vaccine naysayers about actually taking the vaccine? Because it seems as though this is becoming more and more of a talking point on social media platforms, for example, and it seems that it was a concern for the President as well.
So it is in the nature of public health or anything public, by the way, to draw varied responses from a population. In fact, the strength of ideas is not tested or proved when they are not opposed, but when they, after being clarified, still remain convincing to South Africans. So indeed, there's a history of vaccination in the country and across the world. And people know that and, in fact, do have to be reminded about that. But you cannot, at the time when there's something new that is happening, not want to entertain discussions that question the ethics of medicine, when, in fact, it has been proven that medical research, among others, has had questionable ethical conduct, especially in developing countries. So the right way to deal with conspiracy theories is not the epistemically arrogant disrespect that is shown to them by being ruled out outrightly as conspiracy theories. No, it is in fact what the President did yesterday to try and reassure South Africans about what mechanisms of quality control and protection and safety are built into the processes of approvals of medications. So doing that helps to kind of quell some of the fears that people have about a possible nefarious agenda among global pharma in vaccinations. So my short answer, Sakina, is that when there are dissenting views, respect and dealing with them, knowing that it's humans that you're dealing with, is more the appropriate response than the very vulnerable way in which people respond and as if human beings don't have a right to differ.
And of course, Ongama, we're dealing with human beings in a democracy who have rights that are enshrined in a constitution, and many saying that they want those rights upheld. So how does government go about dealing with this? Can government come up with law that would force I beg your pardon, that would force everybody to take this vaccine? Or can people dissent and say, you know what, for those who want to go ahead, I refuse to take it?
Sure. So I don't know what the considerations will be that are made. In fact, some of it President alluded to in terms of what may lead to forcing a vaccination. People have, for example, highlighted things about a possible direct consequence of the need to travel, or what the president was saying yesterday, to achieve a particular level of population immunity. So that may in fact lead towards thoughts around force. But force and democracy are antithetical, especially at a time when you have not yet reached consensus about an issue. It's not that you're going to have consensus about everything. So if you look at the responses to government and executive authority since COVID-19 started, it's easier to become almost authoritarian when the perception about the risk is shared. So South Africans, at the time that the numbers were rising, were themselves calling for stringent lockdown measures. That is because they shared perception about the extent of the risk that we were facing. So in a democracy, it's not necessarily that some actions which may be contrary to libertarian principles cannot be taken. They can be taken when there's consensus that, in fact, the risks that we are facing are quite high. So I think that now, for example, people are looking at the recovery rates and are saying, well, if the recovery rate is ranging between late 80s to 90%, there may not necessarily be a shared risk to make a vaccination forceful. So that may be what challenges the state if it wants to go the route of forced vaccinations.
So also looking at some of the other issues addressed, the decision that 20 land ports of entry that are currently open will be closed until the 15th of February. That's for general entry and departure. Ongama, just a bit of a frog bugging me this morning. So these would, of course, include the 6 busiest ports like Beitbridge, Lebombo, Maseru, Oshuk, Vicksburg, and Kopfontein. Now, people will, however, still be allowed to enter or depart the country for the transportation of fuel, cargo, emergency medical attention for life-threatening conditions, and, of course, for the return of South African nationals or permanent residents or others with valid travel documents. What do you make of this, especially given what we've seen, the chaos we've seen at some of these border posts over the festive period?
It's what would have been expected, state policy position, Sakina, especially if you look at the Bright Bridge border, where you find that some of the conditions people were inhumane, and you could expect that the levels of infection there and transmission would be very high. So the safest thing to do is this measure of closing the borders. What's interesting, though, especially also considering the fact that the other countries are watching how South Africa responds and manages the pandemic when there's a spike, with a view to taking policy decisions on how to treat their trade relations with South Africa. So a lot is at stake when we are seen to have loose controls of our borders. What I like, though, is the fact that the president did allow people who have permanent residents, as well as South African citizens, to be able to return, and not just the commercial activity. That it's not just the commercial activity that's allowed, and that's sensitive enough to social implications of the state's decision to close borders.
Ongama, the issue of schools reopening was another contentious one, and the president saying that he understands the concerns about whether it is advisable for schools to reopen. But President then also said that the National Coronavirus Command Council is, of course, seized with this particular matter, and they will provide guidance on it in the coming days. Are we likely, however, in your view, given what we are seeing, given what the unions are saying when speaking to them yesterday, they actually made mention that they wanted to be part of the frontline workers who were prioritized for vaccination. Taking all of that into consideration, do you think we're likely to see a push to keep schools closed slightly longer?
The one thing I'd like to say, Sakina, is that unlike the first time when the lockdown was undertaken in March and schools were closed, people are anxious because numbers are rising, but the population itself has become used to the alternative methods of delivering education to children. If you ask homeschooling parents, obviously, there are advantages and disadvantages, but people will prefer that the safety of their children be prioritized. So we have a history now with the recent history of what gets done when schools are delayed. So there will be panic, but not necessarily at the same levels as it happened last year when people were worried as to when you reopen, what happens, how safe are the kids. There's some experience as well that has been built into the education system where schools have been able to manage the pandemic. What I hope for is that whatever decision gets taken, as I'm shying away from speculating as to what happens, is that it will be informed by the concerns that are valid, that are coming from teachers, but also it will bear in mind the constitutional obligation to ensure that children receive their education.
And on those constitutional obligations, once again, many people questioning when the president and, of course, previously the Minister of Health spoke about the rollout plan for vaccination and mentioning that prisoners will be up there in terms of those who will be prioritized to receive the vaccine. And many people questioning why prisoners, for example, would be prioritized. How would you address an issue like this?
So South Africa's constitution is set apart, among other things, by the Bill of Rights that is there, which centers human rights and ensures that we build a more humane country compared to what we were known for in the 350 years of colonialism and apartheid, where human rights are respected. One of the things that distinguish us is the humane way in which we treat inmates. And it's not a penal colony where people get forced into servitude. And over time, the conditions in prisons, there's an attempt to improve them. So I don't think that when people raise these concerns about the prioritization of prisoners, it is in line with that spirit of humaneness and human rights. But also, it makes logic because prisoners are locked in confined spaces over longer periods of time, and there'll be a huge loss to human life if there wasn't a proactive approach to preventing, the spread of the pandemic there. So while people have got concerns about the fact that everybody outside of prison is a relatively well-behaved South African and therefore should be rewarded, as it were, I think that falls away considering the fact that we've got a lot more freedom outside of prison to control the extent to which we expose ourselves to the pandemic, whereas people in prisons, even to the level of sleeping arrangements where we can control those outside of prison, but inside they don't have that latitude.
Ongama, thank you so much for helping us unpack some of the president's statement last night. Political analyst Ongama Mtimka speaking to us. And of course, this is our question of the day as well. We're asking for your reaction to the president's speech last night. What did you make of it? What was said and what was not said, perhaps, to your satisfaction? Let us know at Morning Live SABC. Let's take a quick break before our 7 o'clock news.